Have you ever left something behind? I shared a few weeks ago that Stanley and I recently watched the TV series A Small Light, which is about Miep Gies, the Dutch woman who hid the Frank family in the Amsterdam annex for many years. There's a particular detail about the story of the Frank family hiding in that annex that's picked up in the show that you might have been unaware of. And it was the way in which Anne had a special relationship with her cat, Mortje. And she was not allowed to bring her cat to the annex when they went. And it was a huge grief for her that she had to leave her cat Mortje behind when they went into hiding. And not just was it a grief for her that she had to leave Mortje behind, but later after they got there, another family joined them and they had a young boy, and their young boy was allowed to bring his cats to the annex. So Anne had to be there having left her pet behind. She writes about this in her famous diary, her entry in July 12th, 1942. This is what she writes. Sometimes they, the people that she's in hiding with, talk about Mortje, and I can't take that at all. Mortje is my weak spot. I miss her every minute of the day, and no one knows how often I think of her. Whenever I do, my eyes fill with tears. Mortje is so sweet, and I love her so much that I keep dreaming that she'll come back to us. Have you ever had to leave something behind? I remember as a kid, I have a sentimental streak in me, if you haven't learned that already. And I remember as a kid, the first time my family traded out one of our cars. I don't know any other details about the car, but to me it was the red car. And I remember being despondent about leaving behind the red car. I was like, how could you leave behind the red car? Of all the cars, why the red car? Why did you leave the red car behind? Maybe you've had to leave behind something material. Maybe you've had to leave behind a home, a pet, a family member, a keepsake. Maybe you've had to leave behind something immaterial at some point in your life. You had to leave behind something spiritual. Maybe a sense of yourself that you once had that became untenable. Maybe you had to leave behind your comfort. Maybe you had to leave behind a dream or a memory. And leaving things behind are painful, gut-wrenching experiences when we have to be parted from something and we're driving away and we're seeing it in the rearview mirror. The painful, gut-wrenching experiences. Yeah, it's as painful and as gut-wrenching as it is to have to leave something behind. It's not anywhere near as painful as the pain of having been left behind. Have you ever been left behind? Maybe a romantic partner left you, and you felt abandoned and tossed aside and uncared for. And you thought to yourself, what are you doing? And why are you doing it? And how can I get back all the time that I spent on you and on this relationship? Maybe everyone around you moves. Maybe you feel like there's a pattern in your life where you're always the one being said goodbye to. Everyone around you is leaving all the time. Maybe it's a seasonal thing. People move away. You're the one who stays, and you're over and over again going to goodbye party after goodbye party, and you're like, why am I the one who has to stay all the time? Why am I the one who's always on the receiving end of a goodbye? Maybe someone has left you in small incremental ways, in the little ways that we leave people before we actually leave them. Like when you're trying to have a meaningful conversation with somebody and they're scrolling on their phone. And they're in the same place with you, but they've left. They're down a rabbit hole, they're gone. And those little departures from one another, even when we're in the same room, add up to a greater departure over time. It's painful to be left and to be left behind. And in this world and in this life, people get left behind. And when people leave us, we find ourselves crying out, don't go, or come back. Don't leave me. People get left behind in this world. And the Broadway play, The Roommate, is a play about two women who were left behind. The Roommate is a play by the playwright Jen Silverman. It first premiered in 2015 at the prestigious Humana Festival, which is a festival for new American plays in Louisville at the Actors Theater of Louisville every year. It played in 2018 at the famous Steppenwolf Theater in Chicago. That production was actually directed by Felicia Rashad. It opened a couple weeks ago at the Booth Theater just down the street from here on Broadway, and it's starring the very famous Patti LuPone and Mia Farrow. You should go see it. I went and saw it a couple weeks ago. Wonderful, wonderful play. Just a little bit of a plot overview for you to catch you up. The play is about two women, Sharon and Robin. Sharon is a woman in her 50s or 60s living alone in Iowa, and she's kind of an incredibly milquetoast, white bread, mousy, repressed Midwestern woman. And she decides one day to get a roommate. And she stumbles upon Robin, who is a similarly aged woman from New York who is her exact opposite. She's brash and bold and dangerous and experienced, and she wants to get out of New York, so she moves to Iowa, and she moves into Sharon and becomes her roommate. And as the plot unfolds, just as their lives and their personalities overlap with one another and they interact with one another, and the play looks at a number of different themes, including themes of loneliness, addiction, repression, and the theme that we're going to focus on today, what it is to be left behind and what is left of us when we are left behind. We're wrapping up a fun sort of mini sermon series that we've been doing this month called God on Broadway, where we've been looking for biblical themes in shows that have been or are on Broadway this year. We've looked at Sweeney Todd, Water for Elephants, Hadestown. We had a wonderful group of about 30 people go to Hadestown on Thursday. It was so fun. Thank you for joining us for that. It was just a real delight. Today we are bringing that sermon series to a conclusion and looking at the play The Roommate. Our biblical text today is from the Old Testament book of Ruth, chapter 1, verses 15 to 18. I'd encourage you to open up a Bible or a device to the text so that we can look at the text together. Ruth is it the 7th book, 8th book? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. So 8th book. Andrew and I did that together, and we are in agreement. So it's the 8th book of the Old Testament. It's only 4 chapters, so if you're flipping through, you might miss it. It's right between Judges and 1 Samuel, which is an intentional canonical placement of the story. That's a detail for a different time. It's a detail for, a Bible class that I do all the time here. So, come to them. Go to Ruth. Go to Ruth chapter 1, verses 15 to 18. I'll read the text aloud. And Naomi said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. People leave. People leave us. People leave in our lives. People leave in this world. It's a reality of life that people leave. And in The Roommate, Sharon and Robin are two women who have been left. They have been left behind by various people in their lives. Both women are divorced, and both of them have a child that has moved away and wants nothing to do with them. And these leavings that they experience in their life didn't just happen in sort of big dramatic moments. Sometimes they happen to them in little incremental ways in their lives. When Sharon is telling Robin in the play about her divorce, she speaks about it through the language of retirement. She says, "I retired from my marriage." And yet she goes on to tell Robin later that actually her husband retired from the marriage first. This is what she says. She says, "My husband actually retired before I did, actually, from the marriage. But he didn't tell me that, so I had to find out myself." Robin replies, "Another woman? No. He just started spending all his money on models of things, airplanes, trains, cars, and he'd spend all his time with those many things instead of with me in our normal-sized life. And I will say the playwright gives gives Sharon a number of impossibly simple things to say, like that last phrase, such that as a Midwesterner, it looks a little bit like it's a playwright not from the Midwest, writing a bit of a caricature of a Midwesterner instead of a real Midwesterner. But I digress. This leaving, she experienced it slowly. Lost attention, lost quality of time together, reconciling more and more time away until you realize over time that all those little rips in the fabric of a relationship became a great tear over time. What rips in relationships have become tears in your life? Little ways that you or someone close to you have reconciled more and more time away, less and less contact, less and less meaningful interaction until one day those rips add up to a huge tear in the fabric of something or someone that was once meaningful to you, and now you're watching them depart from you. Maybe you felt this way in your life, and if you're feeling this way today, there's good news for you. There's somewhere where you can go to learn about this experience and to be heard and felt and feel felt in this experience, to discover hope in the times when you might have felt left behind. You can go to the pages of the Bible, because the Bible is inspired by God to speak truly about all of the details of human experience and the depths and heights of human feeling, and to tell you truth about hope that you have in those experiences, because God wants to save you out from everything and anything that you could go through. So if you felt left behind today, you can know that people in the Bible felt left behind. And our text today centers on a woman who has been left behind. Her name is Naomi. Naomi has been left behind, and as a result, she no longer feels like herself. She no longer feels like she knows herself. Ruth chapter 1:15 speaks to this. The text says, "And Naomi said, 'See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods.'" Naomi here is speaking to Ruth, and she's saying, look, your sister-in-law has already left. And yet, in order to understand the importance of her sister-in-law departing, we need to go back into the beginning of the chapter, because it's not just one sister-in-law that has left Naomi. Naomi has already been left twice before this text. If we look at Ruth chapter 1, verses 3 to 5, we find out some important context. Naomi is a woman from Bethlehem, a town of Judah, and her husband Elimelech took her to live in Moab. And when they lived in Moab, they had 2 sons, and those 2 sons married Moabite women, and they had a happy familial life in Moab, a country neighboring Judah. And yet, at some point while they were there in Moab, tragedy upon tragedy struck the life of Naomi. This is what Ruth 1, 3 to 5 says. "But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the other, the name was Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband." See how the word left already shows up twice in the text. She's already been left behind twice. Her husband passed away, and she had to live through the tragedy of seeing her sons pass away. So she's already a woman who's been left behind twice over by the harsh realities of the world. And now one of her daughters-in-law has left her a 3rd time. So Naomi is a woman thrice left behind. Why do people leave? Why do people leave other people behind? There's insight into why that happens in this passage. We can maybe pull out 3 reasons that people leave and leave someone behind. Sometimes people are pulled away from us. We leave people behind because we're ripped away by something, some force of the world, or in Naomi's case, by death. We, of course, have no control over when some force of life might rip us from someone. That's one reason why people leave other people behind. We're pulled away. It's not in our control. However, sometimes people leave other people willingly. And we see two reasons in Ruth 1:15 why Ruth's daughter-in-law, Orpah, left her willingly. Why Naomi's daughter-in-law, Orpah, left her willingly. We leave other people for other people, and sometimes we leave people for other gods. Verse 15 says, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Sometimes we have some desirable company that we want to be in more than the company that we're currently keeping. And when our eyes get full of those people and full of what it would be to be with them and full of the opportunities we would get and the relational equity we would have, sometimes we say, I just want to be with other people more than I want to be with these people. That is one reason why people leave one another. The second reason, however, is that we're sometimes leaving one another in pursuit of other gods. And to talk about other gods here is really to talk about idols. Maybe in our language, things that we value and worship above the high and glorious height of the one true God. Sometimes we leave other people because we say we don't share the same values anymore. We're not going in the same direction. I have these other things that I want, and I want them, and I lust after them more than I want to stay in your faithful company. Sometimes we get pulled away by other gods. All of these reasons have caused people to leave Naomi, and so she's a woman thrice left behind. And the problem here is that there's not just a pain about being left behind. That's painful enough. But often when we are left behind, we begin to feel a corresponding pain, the pain of losing a sense of myself, the pain of forgetting who I am and who I thought I was. Because when people leave us behind, we lose something of ourselves when they leave. Because as much as we might try to pretend this isn't true, our lives are bound up in the lives of other people. And my sense of me and who I am is dependent on and shaped by, informed by the people that I'm in relationship with. Our shared experiences, our wins and losses, our laughters and our joys. And so when somebody leaves us, they take some part of us with them when they go. This is manifestly true in our lives. Imagine someone, for example, who feels a living sense of being somebody's grandbaby, somebody's grandchild. What happens to that part of themselves when they wake up one day and look around and realize that all of their living grandparents have been ripped away by the cruel reality of death? What happens to that sure sense of themselves that I'm somebody's grandbaby when actually there's no one to have you as their grandbaby anymore? They take that part of you with them when they go. Maybe you have a part of yourself that says, I'm a competent, hardworking professional. I'm working hard in my life, and I derive real value and meaning from it. What happens on that shock, surprising day when you're called into a meeting that you weren't expecting, and someone says, our company's moving on from you? I'm sorry. They take that part of themselves with you as you walk out the door. That part of you that says, I'm a competent, hardworking person, is robbed from you as they wave goodbye to you in their rearview mirror. We lose a sense of who we are when people leave us. They take a part of us with us. We're often so blissfully unaware of how fragile my sense of me really is, and how easily it would come crashing down if just the one right block were removed from one crucial, pivotal place. When people leave, we forget who we are. And Naomi in the book of Ruth, a woman thrice left, is forgetting who she is. We see this in the immediately following text. Naomi doesn't know what to call herself anymore. She tells people to call her by a different name. In Ruth chapter 1, verses 19 to 21, Naomi and Ruth return to Bethlehem, back to her home, to people who should know her, to people who she should feel a sense of coming home to. And yet this is what she says upon meeting these people again. The women of Bethlehem said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" See, names mean a lot. Names carry a sense of deep spiritual significance about who we are. This has maybe been lost a little bit today, where sometimes we just name people for all sorts of reasons, but in the Hebrew Bible, you were given a name because your name was supposed to mediate something that was spiritually true about you and about what God was doing in the life of your family when you were brought into this world. And so when Naomi's mom gave birth to her, she looked at her and said, "You pleasant, beautiful, delightful child, I'm going to call you Pleasant," which is what Naomi means. Naomi's name means pleasant. And yet Naomi, a woman thrice left behind, came back to her hometown and said, "How can I be pleasant when I've been left over and over and over again? When I left full and have returned empty? And so don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara." The Hebrew word mar means bitter or hurt or injured. The feminine form is Mara. "Call me bitter," she said. "Don't call me pleasant. Don't call me delightful. Call me bitter and harmed and injured." She's lost a sense of who she is, just like we all do when we are left behind, when we've said don't go and the person didn't listen. Having been left over and over again, Naomi's lost a sense of who she is. And the same dynamic is on display in the roommates, people who have forgotten who they are because they've endured so much loss. Sharon speaks about this in a poignant monologue later in the play. She says this, she says, "My roommate told me that people find words for themselves, but those words are not always right. Now I think I don't have the right words anymore. Sharon doesn't feel right. Wife is no longer right, and for some time now, mother has not been right. Roommate was good. That was a good word. But now that's no longer right. God, I just think there's a better way to do things than the one where we live a certain life and then we lose it completely." Maybe you felt this way. Maybe you felt like there was a word that described you well, that doesn't fit anymore, that was taken away from you. Parent, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, boss, friend, and suddenly it was ripped from you. And now you don't have access to that word anymore. And so what do you call yourself when none of the old words fit and describe you anymore? And maybe you found yourself crying out, "Why, God? Why have you created a life and a world where we get things that give us a sense of ourselves only to have those things be so fragile and frail and momentary and taken from us over and over again? There must be a better way of doing things." And when we feel this pain and this disorientation, when we feel like we don't know who we are anymore because so many people have left us behind, we often begin to act in ways that are destructive to ourselves and to other people. We can maybe pull out 3 ways that we act when we're lost in the pain of having been left behind. The first thing that we do when we lose ourselves is we lie. We lie about who we are. We lie to the world. We lie. In the roommate, it comes out about a third of the way through that Robin has left New York kind of low-key because she's a con artist. There's a dialogue when Robin finally reveals this to Sharon. This is what they say. "What did you do?" "I took people's money." "Like you robbed them?" "Yes." "You mugged them?" "No. I convinced them to give me their money." "That doesn't sound illegal." "Under false pretenses. I called them up, old people mostly. They could donate to Save the Whales or orphans or the ozone layer, and they did, and it all went to me." You know, it's easy to look at this and think, gosh, That's a despicable person. And con artists are. It's not great to be conning people, especially vulnerable people. And yet, if we're honest, there's a little bit of con artist in all of us, isn't there? A little bit of all of us that shows up to every person and any interaction that we've ever had saying, I really hope you're going to buy what I'm selling. Here's a certain side of me. Here's the side of me that was set off your warning bells. You don't get to see that side. Here's this side of me. Here's the side of me that the sun is always shining on. This is the side of me that you get to see. Here's the story about me that I want you to know. And in all of these things, are we really doing anything different than selling ourselves, selling a certain version of ourselves to other people and to the world? There's a little bit of a con artist in all of us. But this is what we do when we're crushed by the pain of being left behind, when we don't know who we are, when we feel like if people see the bad side of myself, they'll leave. And so I have to present a certain side of myself. We lie, we trick them, we con them, and we do this because we are in great pain of having been left behind. The second thing that we do after lying is that we give up. Sometimes when we're beaten up by the pain of having been left behind, we just give up. Robin feels like Sharon is giving up as a result of having been left behind. And in multiple times in the play, she's encouraging Sharon to get up again and stand and walk and live. Robin says, Sharon, you've got to stop thinking of yourself as basically dead. You are actually younger than most U.S. presidents. You are young enough that if you were president, you would be a young president. Okay? So just stop mummifying yourself. Sharon has been left, and as a result, her world has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, which with each progressive having been left behind, she's given up. And sometimes we do this. We give up. The thing about giving up is it's not just a sort of emotional disposition of being low energy or of not attempting that thing. Giving up is burying myself early. It's dying early. It's mummifying myself early. It's communicating to the world and everyone around me that the things that I lost were the only things worth living for, and there's nothing that could come my way. No one that could come my way that's worth living for anymore. And so I'm basically just going to start dying early. That's what it is to give up. And sometimes we give up when we're burdened by the pain of having been left behind. We lie, we give up. And a third thing that we do when we're hurt by being left behind is that we push people away. How painful that is. What a cruel reality it is that being left behind by people makes us push more people away. When we're in a place of needing people to be with us, we make it harder by being grouchy, distant little curmudgeons that push people away because we're afraid of being left again. And Naomi is doing this third thing in our text today to Ruth. In verse 15, after narrating to Ruth how Orpah has left her, Naomi then turns to Ruth and says, return after your sister-in-law. Naomi's saying, my husband's left me, my sons have left me, my one daughter-in-law left me. You should leave me too. Leave me. It's like that classic scene in those tearjerker 90s pet movies, right? Like 15 minutes before the end of the movie where the person's shooing the pet away. They go on, get out of here, right? It's that thing in all those movies. That's what Naomi's doing to Ruth, shooing her away. I've got one person who knows what I'm talking about, and it's Anne. She's seen the movies. That scene where they say, get out of here. We never wanted you here anyway. And then 15 minutes later, they're all hugging and crying, and it's delightful. They all end well. That's what's happening here. Naomi is pushing Ruth away because she's like, I've been left once. I've been left twice. I've been left a third time. just leave me a fourth time. Just go, just leave me. And we do this when we have been left behind by other people. Maybe right now, God is giving you insight into your own spirit and your own mind and your own heart, and you're gaining insight into yourself, and you're going, gosh, I do this. I do this in my friendships. I do this with my family. I do this all the time. I just have that one key hurt back there, those two key hurts back there where I was left, and I'm just sure I'm going to get left again. And so I just keep people at a distance all the time. I push people away when the very thing that I need is closeness to somebody. This is what happens when people leave and we collect pain and we forget who we are. We lie, we give up, and we push people away. And the reality is that in these moments, what we actually need is for someone to somehow overcome those faults and flaws that are in us as a result of our pain and to stay with us. Because actually, if we could experience just one person who was faithful to us and stayed with us, it would be remarkably healing and saving for us in the places where we feel abandoned. Sharon has a beautiful monologue where she reflects on this exact dynamic in the show. This is what she says. Think about what it is to be alone. It is a late night somewhere wherever you are, and you are alone. Think about the objects you arrange around you, but everything is cold under your hand. And then someone comes into your life, and you become different, and you find yourself to be truly alive. Think about how one person can change an entire lifetime of accumulated coldness and objects and silence. When we are in a death spiral of having been left behind, what we need is the profound fortune and grace to have someone who is determined to stick by us anyways, to remind us who we are, to tell us the truth, to challenge us, to help us not get up and die early, to fight with us to keep living, and to courageously resist our efforts when they try to hold them at a distance, even when we don't make it easy. One person who stayed with us in that way, who stayed with us even when we made it hard, who stayed with us even when we made bad decisions, to stay with us when nobody else would, that would change this whole situation in our lives. And Naomi had the great fortune and grace to have one such person in her life, and her name was Ruth. We need someone in our lives who's not going anywhere, and Ruth was that for Naomi. Naomi did everything she could to push Ruth away, but this is what Ruth said to her in reply. Verse 16 and 17 of chapter 1. But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more, if anything but death parts me from you." Everything that you need to know about Ruth's heart and disposition about this question of whether or not she should leave Naomi is wrapped up in the word she uses to describe departure. The word that Naomi uses, the word in 15, is a Hebrew word that corresponds just to the English word return, which is a valueless description of the act of just going back to where you came from. There's nothing moral about it. It's just a raw description of the reality of returning. That's what Naomi says Ruth should do. But when Ruth replies to Naomi, she doesn't first say, "Don't urge me from not returning to you." She says in the ESV, "Don't urge me to leave you," which is really better rendered with the English word forsake. That is a word that has a moral dimension. That is a word that doesn't just say, for me to return to my family would just be the physical act of me walking back. That word says, for me to return would to be to abandon you, to forsake you, to leave someone behind when that person needs someone to stay. Everything that you need to know about Ruth is bound up in that word. When she doesn't say, I'm just not going to return, she says, I will not forsake you. It would be wrong for me to leave you behind. I'm not going anywhere. And the reality is that Ruth has every reason to leave Naomi. And Naomi knows this. This is part of the reason why Naomi is telling her to leave. Naomi's son is dead. There's no child coming for Ruth. There's no child that's going to provide for her financially or give her an attachment to a social structure. Part of the whole thing that Naomi was supposed to be able to give Ruth was a son who's going to be her husband, who's going to give her kids. That was a whole basket of provision that she was going to get from Naomi. And when he died early, it's not just that he died, it's that Naomi was not able to give Ruth what she said she was going to be able to give her. Not only that, but Naomi is poor and Ruth is poor. Naomi has no financial provision to fall back on. And finally, Ruth is a Moabite and Naomi is returning to Judah. And so Ruth is about to go to a country that she's never lived in to be a cultural and an ethnic outsider. Naomi has nothing to give to Ruth. Nothing at all. And so it makes every sense in the world that Ruth would leave and go back to her own people and try to find someone who can give the things to her that they're supposed to give. That's why Orpah leaves. Because Orpah's going to go back home to her Moabite family and they're going to try to rebuild her life. It's a perfectly reasonable decision. But that's the point, isn't it? There's always a reason to leave somebody behind. There's always a justification. And what we need in this world and in our lives is somebody whose eyes are full of faith to see a higher good and to trust that when I stay with this person, God is going to provide for me somehow anyways. There's always a reason. The world's full of reasons to leave people behind. We're full of reasons. I need to do this for my health. I need to do this for my wellness. I need to do this to make more money. I need to do this because I can't be around this dynamic anymore. Reason after reason after reason. But what Ruth has in herself is living spiritual power to say it's wrong to forsake someone who needs someone to stick by their side. And so I'm not going anywhere. I'm going into the dark with you. And so she stays with Naomi. The rest of these verses are a program written by Ruth for how to not leave someone behind. She should have written a little book called How to Not Leave People Behind by Ruth. There would have been 3 chapters. The first chapter would have been courage. You need courage to not leave somebody behind. What's the first thing that Ruth says to her in verse 16? She says, do not urge me to leave you. More literally, the English says something like, stop pressing on me to forsake you. She's saying, stop pushing me. The Hebrew word has like a force a part of it. She's saying, stop pushing me away. And sometimes when someone needs someone to stay with them, they put up a big front that says, get away from me. My attitude, my bad choices, my explicit speech. And Ruth sees that in Naomi and has courage to say, stop pushing me away. That's the first thing that enables her to not leave. She has courage. The second thing is that she demonstrates commitment. Ruth says, I won't leave you regardless of what you do. Ruth says, the only thing that will part me from you is death. This is what she says in 17, where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. This is almost marital language. Till death do us part. It's that kind of strength of vow, and she seals it by saying, God is watching this vow, and maybe he'd do more to me than death, if anything but death parts me from you. When you are trying to stay with someone that is hard to stay with, that is giving you every reason to leave them behind, only a strength of commitment unto death is going to be strong enough to hang with them. Because the reality is that people give us good reason over and over and over and over again to say, I'm done with this. I'm just done with it. And of course, there are certain situations and kinds of relationships where people do need to say, I'm separating myself from this. Situations like clear and obvious abuse. Maybe there are situations where someone is engaging with you chronically in a certain behavior, and there's a way to say no to that behavior while still saying, I'm still with you. Right? You can do that too. But however you do that, if you're staying with someone, in order to stay over the long haul, you have to say, my commitment to you is transcending anything that you could bring to the table that would make me leave. It takes courage, it takes commitment, and finally, it takes communion. This would be the third chapter in her book. Finding significant ways to be with somebody. Ruth says a number of things that demonstrate the way that she's going to commune with Naomi. She says, where you lodge, I will lodge. I'm going to live with you. Whether you wanted me to or not, whether you invited it or not, I'm going to be right there. And she was. When we flip forward into the story and see them back in Bethlehem of Judea, the text says Ruth was with her. Ruth 2:23 says, and Ruth lived with her mother-in-law. Whether Naomi wanted a roommate or not, Ruth said, I'm with you, I'm communing with you, I'm staying with you. But she didn't just have communion by being physically with her. She also said, and I'm going to take on your people and I'm going to take on your God. We're going to be together with the same people, and we are going to worship and value the same things. And this third item, sharing the same object of worship, is at the end of the day the thing that is the strongest bond you could have to keep somebody together. Because there's nothing like finding out 2 years into an important relationship, 5 years, 10 years in, that you don't worship the same things, that you don't share the same values, and as a result, you're now walking on different paths. At the end of the day, the thing that you can have with somebody else, a friend, especially a romantic or an intimate partner, that is going to build you the best possible opportunity to make it through the long run, is to say, we worship the same God, and so we value the same things. And Ruth takes that on with Naomi and says, your object of worship is now my object of worship. And in these three things, where we live, the people that we relate to, and what we worship, she's communing with Naomi. And Ruth's faithfulness over time, if we were to fast forward to the end of Naomi's story, restores Naomi to herself and to her life. Ruth finds a husband and gets married and has a child. And near the end of the book, we see these verses written about Naomi's restoration. This is what Ruth 4:14-15 says. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. What a shocking and high valuation in the ancient world this line is. Whether you feel in this moment a modern rebelling at this verse or not, you have to understand, in the ancient world, to say that Ruth, her daughter, is more to her than any son she could ever have. There's no higher vindication that this ancient context could have given to Ruth's fidelity to Naomi when she should have left her alone. Ruth's faithfulness has totally rebuilt Naomi's life from the ground up. And when we are abandoned and left for dead and don't know who we are and can't remember our own name, we can't remember the sounds of the voices who once loved us, we can't remember what it feels like to do something and feel strong. We can't remember what it was like to be building a life instead of watching it fall apart. We need somebody to be determined to not leave us behind. We need someone to come and get us, and we need someone who's not going anywhere. Not everyone gets a Ruth. Not everyone gets a person in this world who's going to treat them this way, who's going to spend their lifeblood to build their life back up from the ground up. Where do we find a person like that in a selfish world, in a distracted world, in a faithless time, where the world is full of leaving and being left alone? Where do we find a person who's not going anywhere? The Bible says that there's a God in heaven. The Bible says that there's a God in heaven. And then that God sees and finds people who have been left alone and left behind. And he comes to them, and he dwells with them, and he makes his home with them. And he never, ever, ever leaves them behind. The God of the Bible will come and find you and be with you and never leave you, because the God of the Bible doesn't leave people behind. God's not going anywhere. God will never leave us. And Jesus loved telling people that he would never leave them. The Gospel of Matthew begins by telling us that God is with us. Matthew 1:23 says this about Jesus: "Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they will call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us." God's Son, Jesus Christ, Emmanuel, named Emmanuel, literally meaning the Hebrew for Immanuel, God with us God. Literally a translation of the words for with us God. Now, we've heard that title so many times because we've been to Christmas services and sang carols, I think, Emmanuel, God with us, God with us. But sometimes the title can feel far away because of overexposure. We realize what it means for God to be with us when we think about God with us in a particular situation. Like, what would it mean for God to be with us in a situation where we feel left behind? It would mean God who's not going anywhere. Jesus Christ, Emmanuel, God's not going anywhere. What about a situation when you felt thrown away or discarded? Jesus Christ, Emmanuel, with you, holding you in his hand and never letting you go. God with us becomes meaningful for us when we see what it means in the place where we need someone with us. And that is the place where God with you means something. This Jesus is the manifestation of the God who loves to say to his people in the Bible, "I will never leave you or forsake you." This God comes incarnate in his Son, Jesus Christ. And it's not just the beginning of Matthew's gospel that tells us that God loves being with us in Jesus. It's the end of Matthew's gospel. The last line of Matthew's gospel is Matthew 28:20, which says, "And behold, I am with you always, to the end of the age." Twice in Matthew's gospel, right at the beginning and at the very, very end, the gospel says to you, "Behold," which means look. Stop what you're doing and pay attention. And what does it tell you to look at? The reality that God is with you and he's not going anywhere. How is Jesus able to be with us like he promises in this passage, even to the end of the age? He's able to be with us even now by the power of his Spirit. Because when we believe in Jesus, our faith opens a door into our hearts and into our lives and into our world. Our faith opens a door, and the Spirit of Jesus, the Holy Spirit, the tangible presence of the living God made available to us now in this time, comes to rest on us and go with us in our lives, to encourage us, to journey with us, and to bless us, and to never, ever leave us. And if you would let him, the Spirit of Jesus would come and rest on you and would never leave you, would stick with you, and would not ever go anywhere. Ruth 1:18 says this, "And when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said no more. Even though Ruth is bringing everything possible to the table to go with Naomi and stay with her, Naomi still has to participate in the smallest amount to let her come into her life. She's got to stop fighting her presence and say, you can come and be with me and travel with me. Even if she just says it by not talking, by just stopping fighting. God has done everything possible to let you know that he wants to be with you. All of your clamoring for someone to not leave you behind has its clear and obvious answer in the God who descended from heaven to be beaten and battered and bruised and die on a cross and come back to new life full of spiritual power to give you that spiritual power now to dwell with you. It is the perfect answer for your longing to not be alone. But you have a part to play. You have to say, I'm done fighting with you. I'm done putting up obstacles. I'm done putting up barriers. I'm just going to say, you can come with me. You can walk with me. You can hold my hand. I'm going to stop pushing you away. Your presence and your company and companionship would be good for me. You have a part to play. God's doing all the work of Ruth. You have to do the work of Naomi, and even though you've been left once, twice, 3 times, and you will be left again by people in this world, you have to do the work of saying, I've seen someone whose promise can be trusted. They're not going anywhere, and so God, you can come with me. You have to do the work of Naomi. Naomi had to stop pushing Ruth away. You've got to stop pushing God away. You push God away when you ignore him, when you reject his words, when you won't talk to him in any way. Do you know that prayer is just the most accessible thing, maybe in the world? There's nothing more accessible than being able to at any time go, God, thank you for Jesus. He's maybe able to pray at any time I'm praying to you. It's just the easiest thing. It's so simple. But we reject God when we don't talk to him, just like we reject anyone when we don't talk to them. All of these things aren't just bad. It's not that they're bad. It's that they're relationally acidic. How can you have a relationship with anyone when you don't talk to them, when you don't listen to them, when you don't thank them? These are ways that we push God away, and we've got to stop. And yet not only do we just have to do the action of not pushing God away, we have to ask God for a change in our hearts to long for God to be with us. And Naomi here has to undergo a heart change. Maybe she undergoes it right here. Maybe it stretches out over time in the book of Ruth where she says, I would like for someone if they would prove faithful to be with me. And your heart has to begin to long for God's faithful presence again. Do you want this God? That's what it actually comes down to at the end of the day. And in some small way, it was revealed for Naomi that if someone would prove faithful to her, she would want a faithful companion to not leave her in the dust. God will not leave you in the dust, but you have to let him in. You have to want him and long for him. Do you want this God? You should want this God. If not for your own sake, for the sake of other people. Because people are lonely and left behind in this world. This world is a world that's being left in the dust. And God would go with them and stay with them if they had anybody to say, I found a traveling companion when I felt alone and discarded in this world. This lonely world needs to know the love of God and the mercy of God and the grace of God, and to know that God is never, ever, ever going to leave them. And their knowledge of that depends on your knowledge of it. It starts with you saying, I don't want to be alone. I'll let God in. I'll walk with God. And let me say to you today, the world has surely given you many, many good reasons to think that saying yes to one more promise from a faithful companion will come back to bite you in the end. Think of one of those reasons now. The world's given you reasons to think that people are unfaithful and they don't keep their promises and they'll let you down, and so you should keep pushing people away and holding them at a distance. You have many, many good reasons. That's why God has given us faith to be able to trust him, because it is true that there is one person who has proven faithful, and that person is Jesus. And you need to today set aside the good reasons that you have for not trusting God and to trust him anyways, because Jesus has shown you that he's trustworthy. Stop pushing God away and long for him in your hearts. And if you do, he will come and walk with you. He'll hold your hand. He'll never, ever, ever leave you in the dust. He'll never wave goodbye to you looking in his rear view mirror. He will come and stay with you and never leave you behind, because the God of the Bible is not going anywhere. Amen.